Welcome to Passion for Sound, the channel dedicated to thorough and honest reviews of headphones, earphones, DACs, headphone amps, other components and accessories. Basically everything audio related except power amps and passive speakers. My name's Lachlan and my goal is to explore and discuss all kinds of audio topics, even the controversial ones, to help us all find more enjoyment from music. Thanks for watching and enjoy the video. Hey folks, welcome to another Passion for Sound audio review. Today we're looking at the Shanling M6 Pro digital audio player, this little guy here. And I want to start off by saying a huge thanks to Melbourne Chi-Fi Audio for making this review possible. They sourced a demo unit from Shanling for me, but it is on a short turnaround, so this review may not have quite the level of detail that I normally like to provide, but I'll try to provide as much info as I can and hopefully cover everything that really matters, at least in my experience with the device, everything that matters about it. The M6 Pro is a $759 digital audio player, which means it retails here in Australia for about $1,300 Australian dollars. That puts it in the upper end of things. It's not the flagship from Shanling, and it's nowhere near what you can spend on a digital audio player, but it's still quite an expensive device. So I was really excited to play with it, see how it sounded, and see how it stacked up to some of my other devices, such as an Earman Sparrow running from a phone, for example, and also my trusty Mojo and Poly combo. So to get things started, let's take a look at the M6 Pro. One thing I should quickly mention here is that if you've watched my recent review of the HiFiMan Anandas and now you're watching this review, you might recognize me wearing exactly the same clothes. I raise this not because it's an issue on its own, but because I happen to be wearing a Jashelli Labs t-shirt. And I wanted to clarify that I'm wearing the t-shirt twice because I've recorded these reviews back to back due to a limited amount of time this week and needing to squeeze in a few things around my son's birthday and a short trip away that we've got planned. So apologies for the fact that these two reviews look the same, but more importantly, I wanted to flag the fact that there is no sponsorship from Jashelli Labs. They just happen to send me the t-shirt, and I happen to wear darker coloured t-shirts on the channel because they come up better in the videos. For today, this is the t-shirt that I grabbed, and that's the only reason that I'm wearing the Jashelli Labs t-shirt. I'm not specifically recommending their brand, I'm not sponsored by them, and there's no financial incentive for me to do so. On that note, if any other manufacturers want to send me their t-shirts, I'll gladly wear those too, just never on a video of a product made by a competitor brand. So I'd never wear this t-shirt, for instance, if I was reviewing a Schiit product or a Singer product or a Chord product, anyone that made a directly competing product, I wouldn't wear a Jashelli Labs t-shirt. So I just wanted to cover that off in case anyone thinks there's any kind of bias or sponsorship going on. There's absolutely not. It's just a t-shirt that I like from a brand that I respect, and that's all there is to it. So with that out of the way, let's get back into the content. As you can see, the M6 Pro is a fairly sizable digital audio player when you look at some of the options on the market, like the Shanling Q1, which I reviewed here on the channel and absolutely loved. The M6 Pro has a lot more hardware in it, of course, because it's a very high-end device with a pair of AKM DAC chips and also a much more powerful amplifier. There's also balanced outputs, as I'll talk about in a second, so it's got a lot more going on than the Q1, as well as no doubt more componentry to allow for a better amplifier circuit. I think the physical design of the M6 Pro is absolutely wonderful. Having owned some Astel and Kern players and also playing around with Ibassos in the past and some Cowan players, I've tried a few different things over time, and this is one of the nicer feeling devices I've had. To give you a quick tour of it, we've got down the left hand side as you're facing the screen, we've got the control button, so you've got back, play and forwards. You've then got a micro SD slot. On the bottom we've got USB-C, and then we've also got a balanced 2.5, a single-ended 3.5, and a balanced 4.4mm connector. So you've got massive versatility in terms of what you can plug into this, and it's really nice to see that so many options are available. Of course, you can always adapt 2.5 to 4.4 or 4.4 to 2.5, but it's nice to not have to think about having those different adapters on hand. Particularly if you're running full-sized headphones, you're most often going to get a 4.4mm cable, not a 2.5. So it's great that this caters to both IEM users that might be using 2.5s and full headphone users that might be using 4.4. Finally, on the other side of the device, we've got a rotary volume control that's also your power button, and above it we've got an LED indicator which works in much the same way as the LEDs on something like the Shanling UP4 to show you when you're using Bluetooth connections, which codecs are being used, what sample rates are being used. It does various functions like that. I'm not going to get into the details about that light there. It's not something I found I actually looked at or cared about very much. And as I said before, with the quick turnaround of this review, I've really had to focus on the stuff that really matters, which is going to be the sound and the usability of the device. Speaking of usability, the M6 Pro is built on an Android basis. So that means that you can use various Android apps, but it is a little tiny bit clumsy to get it set up. With the latest firmware, you can install Google Play Store on it fairly easily, but it doesn't come with Google Play Store installed. So when you get it, you're going to use an APK app to download the Play Store APK, which is essentially the file for the app, and then install the Play Store, log in, and then you can start installing normal apps. It does mean it's a few extra steps before you can get really going with things like, say, USB Audio Player Pro, or Neutron, or Power Amp, any of those player apps you might want to use, and of course Tidal, Qobuz, Spotify, any of the streaming apps, you're going to want to do the same way. You can download a lot of those apps using the APK app provided. So if you don't want to use Google Play Store, you can keep it running just the select APKs without having to log into the whole Google infrastructure using the M6 Pro. So you do have that choice if you want to. I'm not sure how quickly updates from those apps are going to come through via the APK app. It does alert you of updates, but you may not be getting the most recent versions of, say, streaming apps as you would if you do use the Google Play Store option. So it's worth keeping in mind, but in terms of app functionality, the ability to load different apps, it's just fine, even if it's a tiny bit clumsy at the startup. A couple of minor issues that I found with the interface was that using Android in the way that they have does make finding certain controls a bit clumsy. So some controls are accessed through the player app, some controls are accessed through the settings menu where you go into settings and then audio, but then a few controls such as switching the DAC functionality on and off, that is using it as a USB DAC, that functionality is in the swipe down menu. So if you go into the audio menu, which is where I expected to find it, there was nowhere to find the ability to switch on DAC mode. Until you look at the swipe down menu, you may not know, like I didn't, where and how to switch on DAC mode. Once I found that, it all made sense and was very straightforward, but it's a bit broken up in terms of finding different settings in different places. So for example, the filter settings are within the Android audio settings, whereas on some other devices I've tried in the past, those sorts of settings are often within the player app. So it's very varied where you can find different information and different settings, and it does take a while to get set up. Speaking about the filters, I did play briefly with them, and no doubt they will make subtle changes to the sound, but I didn't have time to go through and listen thoroughly to them enough in order to work out my favourite. So that's something I'd leave up to you, but the nice thing is you have the ability to play with those features if you'd like to. One final issue I had with the M6 Pro from time to time was the touchscreen wasn't quite as responsive as I'd like from time to time, particularly in the top or bottom edges of the screen. So when I was looking to try to access the menu for the player app, the button's up in the very top left corner, and it sometimes took me a couple of presses to get it to respond and register that that's what I was asking for. Similarly, when I was using the keyboard on screen, I did find sometimes it difficult, partly because it was very small, but also partly because around the edges of the screen seemed to me to be a little bit less responsive. For general usage, there are no issues at all, so most of the content you're going to be accessing is in the center of the screen, and things like swiping, pressing play, pause, stuff like that works no problems at all. It's only stuff that's out at the extremities, and they're not things you access very often. So once I had the M6 Pro all set up, I had Qobuz running, I had some files, some audio files on an SD card, I got rolling and started to have a listen to the M6 Pro. What I immediately noticed was a wonderful sense of soundstage size, particularly width, but also a beautiful sense of separation between sounds. Things are really well laid out, and there's a nice richness to the sound without getting thick at all. One thing that I would pick at slightly with the M6 Pro is there's a little bit of edge to the treble from time to time. I found that when comparing it to some other devices, and also depending on which earphones I was using, I sometimes felt like the treble was just a bit too bright and a little bit too harsh. Now, I'm not suggesting that this has any peaks or troughs in its frequency response. No doubt if it's measured, it measures dead flat, but it's more in the presentation of certain frequencies. So it's more of a tonal or timbral characteristic rather than an actual frequency response issue. I did actually test that by running a test tone for a headphone through the M6 Pro, the TT2 and the Burson Soloist, and across the board all of them had identical frequency response. So it's not like it's actually adding extra treble energy, it's just there's something about the quality of the treble that is just a little bit edgy sometimes. It's not a reason not to buy the M6 Pro, but it does mean it's not the very smooth sounding DAP on the market when you look at other options like say the Astel and Kearns. I don't currently own an A&K DAP to directly compare to the M6 Pro, but having owned a number of them, I know that the quality of their treble delivery, and in fact the quality of all of their delivery, tends to be very articulate but very smooth. And that's one area where the M6 Pro just fell down a tiny bit. It is very articulate, but it's not always as smooth as I'd like. As always with a device like this that has both single-ended and balanced outputs, it's important to me to know how it performs on both outputs to see if it's something that you can use with both single-ended and balanced wired headphones and earphones. And I'm pleased to say that the M6 Pro does sound good with both, but it sounds significantly better with balanced. There's a bit of volume matching required when going from balanced to single-ended, but the good news is the difference is significant enough that there's no doubt that it's there. The balanced output is more spacious and more resolving overall than the single-ended, but the single-ended is not bad. You've got the choice with single-ended to use one of the DACs or two of the DACs. So there's a normal DAC mode and what they call turbo DAC mode. And definitely there's a big difference using turbo DAC or using both DACs for the single-ended output. It does bring the sound of the single-ended closer to balanced, but the balanced is still definitely preferable. It's at a level that I would definitely want to use balanced output wherever possible with the M6 Pro, and that to me is a slight drawback. I like it when a device is strong enough single-ended that I don't feel like I always want balanced wiring, because not all IEMs and headphones come with the right cables. This is a DAP that would kind of make me want to go out and have to buy extra cables for the IEMs and the headphones I have that don't come with balanced wiring as standard. So as I said, it's a slight drawback, not a huge deal. Single-ended sounds good, but balanced really shows you what the M6 Pro is capable of. Before I get to a couple of comparisons, I thought it was worth checking out how the M6 Pro performs with a couple of full-size headphones, and particularly really high-end ones, partly to see how well it drives them, but also to see just how good the M6 Pro can sound. The first headphone I tried was the Focal Utopia, which I only have single-ended wiring for, and therefore was driving it from the single-ended output. On low gain, I was sitting at only 44% volume from the M6 Pro, and that was just plenty for me. So there's lots and lots of power available, and you're not going to need much more than 40 to 50% for many headphones on the market. Before you ask, I haven't tried this with any crazy difficult planar magnetics because I currently don't own any. But I'm pretty confident that with high gain mode available, it's going to drive most normally demanding headphones on the market. I'm not talking HE6 or Susvara or anything like that, but most of the more kind of mainstream headphones on the market, the M6 Pro should be just fine with. With the Utopia, I found the M6 Pro to mostly sound fantastic. Resolution, detail retrieval, imaging focus, all of them were really fantastic. The only thing that brought it undone slightly for me was that treble quality once again. The Utopia is not a particularly warm headphone to start with, in fact it's fairly neutral, and so the qualities of the treble from the M6 Pro combined with the starting tonality, if you like, of the Utopia made for a sound that was just a little bit dry and a little bit harsh sometimes. And that for me is probably the consistent complaint about the M6 Pro, is it just does have that little bit of harshness and a little bit of dryness in the treble. Everything else it does is absolutely wonderful. It's got a nice, rich, clean mid-range. It's got good bass extension and good bass quality in general. So there's nothing to complain about there, but the treble does bring it undone a little bit. My next headphone test was with the Meze Empyreans, and I do have a balanced cable for those, and so that's how I ran it. The Empyreans only needed 36% of the balanced volume output, so once again, plenty of power available. Also once again, the sound was really hard to fault. With the Empyreans being being smoother overall, they help to tame the slightly harsh sound of the M6 Pro's treble, and it's very, very slight. So when I'm saying this, don't start to think that this is some nasty, harsh sounding device that's like running sandpaper through your ears. It's not like that at all. It's just if I had to pick out one issue with it, it would be the quality of the treble. So a headphone or earphones with the smoothness of something like the Empyreans do help to tame that a little bit. It also sounded wonderful with my 64 Audio U12T. Occasionally I would notice the harshness with those, but for the most part it was pretty rare. Coming back to my experience with the Empyreans, the overall sound was excellent. Soundstage space was fantastic, and whilst it doesn't quite reach the heights of some of the very best systems I've heard, the fact that it's as good as it is from a portable is still very impressive. So at this point, I'm pretty comfortable saying that from a pure sound quality point of view, at the price point this sits, I think it's pretty impressive. It approaches the levels of sound quality that you can get from a good desktop system, like a well-priced desktop system. It's not going to match a top-tier desktop system like some of the stuff I've got here behind me, but for a what I'd call kind of mid-high-end DAP, I think it's performing really nicely. And with that in mind, I wanted to see just how nicely compared to some alternatives that you might consider. Let's say, for example, you're contemplating whether or not you go from using your smartphone as a streaming device with an external DAC to using something like a dedicated player. In that case, you might be using something like an Earman Sparrow. At $200 US, the Sparrow is obviously a lot cheaper than the M6 Pro. But then you do need a phone in order to make the Sparrow work. So let's look instead at both as portable balanced audio devices. The Sparrow sounds absolutely fantastic, but to cut straight to the chase, the M6 Pro walks all over it. The sound from the M6 Pro is more spacious, the mid-range is richer, and the soundstage is much wider. The sound from the M6 Pro is more spacious, the mid-range is richer, and it's overall the more engaging listen. While I was doing this comparison, I was streaming the new Rag & Bone Man album, Life by Misadventure, through Qobuz into both devices. The particular track I was listening to was called Fireflies. On the M6 Pro, I was absolutely captivated by this track. It was the first time I'd ever listened to it, and I was thoroughly enamored by it and wanted to listen to the rest of the album straight away. When I flipped over to the Sparrow, some of that magic disappeared, and it's not just because I'd already heard the song before, it was that it didn't have that same captivating sense of space and articulation and resolution that I was hearing from the M6 Pro. So for me, it's a simple answer. If you're looking for an upgrade in terms of sound quality and you're wondering if it's worth going from something like a Sparrow with your smartphone over to a dedicated DAP like the M6 Pro, the M6 Pro, whilst a large jump in price, is also a huge jump in sound quality. The Sparrow is amazing for its price and it's a wonderful little device, but it doesn't hold a candle to what the M6 Pro can do. My next comparison was with the Chord Poly and Chord Mojo combo. That combo retails for about $1,150 US, so it is a more expensive setup. It's also really clumsy to use. From an interface point of view, I really don't like the Chord Mojo and Chord Poly, but from a sound quality point of view, I really love it. Putting the two side by side, what I noticed was that the two of them both did some things really well and outshone each other in different ways. The Mojo Poly combo does some of the subtleties better than the M6 Pro. It's got that sense of depth and space in the soundstage that only Chord and shit multi-bit DACs seem to be able to manage, and it therefore provides a sense of three-dimensionality and weight to instruments and vocals that the M6 Pro can't quite match. On the flip side, the M6 Pro does come across as being a bit more resolving and with a better sense of detail retrieval, but it does it all in a slightly flatter presentation, but with more sense of width instead. I found in a lot of cases, the Mojo Poly combo was more engaging and more generally enjoyable with slightly better tonal accuracy, whereas on other tracks, the M6 Pro was outstanding because of its detail retrieval and resolution, but often was less engaging and more of a technicality show rather than a musical enjoyment experience. I think ultimately those of you looking for a technically exciting listening experience, the M6 Pro is probably a good option. For those looking more for engagement and realism of sound, the nod probably goes across to the Mojo Poly, but that's with the caveat that you have to be able to put up with what I think is a pretty dreadful interface. I do put up with it because of its sound quality capabilities, but it is a major drawback. The M6 Pro, on the other hand, was a breeze for the most part. And this is where we start to have another issue with the M6 Pro. and that is that for some reason it just would not play back quite a number of tracks on my SD card. At least some of these tracks are just standard ripped Redbook CD files, and those exact same tracks on the exact same card played back with no problems through the Mojo on the Poly. So I don't know exactly what's going on here. I haven't had time to troubleshoot and try and sort it out, but I found that whether I was using PowerAmp or the built-in Shanling Player app, it would skip a whole lot of tracks and just say they were unplayable. Whereas in the case of the Mojo Poly, it played them with no problems at all. So I don't know what's going on there, but it's enough that it does put me off recommending the M6 Pro wholeheartedly. I don't necessarily know how it's going to go playing back all of the files that you might have on an SD card. The good news is it does a great job streaming Tidal and Cobas and the like, so if you're happy using streaming services, you'll have no issues at all. It's just that SD card thing has me slightly concerned. It also somehow corrupted an SD card while I was using it, and that SD card then became unplayable on the M6 Pro, and yet it still played on the Mojo Poly combo. So there's a few issues with the M6 Pro that have left me just a little bit uncomfortable recommending it. There's that little bit of treble harshness, which may also be a burn-in issue. I haven't had the device long enough to give it hundreds of hours, and so it's possible that the treble will improve over time. So do keep that in mind. This device may get better sonically than I've said, and if it does, it's absolutely going to be a wonderful, wonderful device. But it has just a few interface issues that leave me still not entirely willing to highly recommend it. I would say that it's worth considering, and particularly if you're going to use streaming services. But if you're using the SD card, maybe do a bit more research about other people's experience before you proceed with the purchase. I think it's a beautifully made device. I've loved my previous Shanling product experiences that I've tried. I think they've all been nicely tuned, they've all worked really well, and so this one's left me just not quite as confident as some of those others. I think sound quality is still excellent, and as I said, may get better, but interface does leave me just a tiny bit nervous. So with that caveat in mind, if this sounds like a device that you're interested in looking into further, do some extra research if you're looking at using it with an SD card. Don't worry about research if you're going to be running streaming services. It works beautifully with those across the board. A couple of things I didn't mention, but I can confirm, is that it is Bluetooth capable both as a Bluetooth receiver and as a Bluetooth sender, meaning that you can run your wired headphones using a Bluetooth source from the M6 Pro, or you can use this as a playback device sending Bluetooth to your Bluetooth headphones. It's also, as I've already touched on, a fully capable USB DAC, and that once you download and install the drivers on your machine if you're using Windows, it works beautifully and seamlessly in that function. So it's very capable and very powerful. It just comes with those couple of little caveats about things like the glitches or the lack of sensitivity with the interface, and also the issues I had with certain file playback from SD card. So if you want to know more about the M6 Pro, I'll put a link down below through to Melbourne Chi-Fi Audio. There's no kickbacks there, it's just a way of saying thank you to them for providing the M6 Pro for review. I hope you found this review useful. If you have, I'd love it if you'd hit like and subscribe to make sure that you see more videos like this one in the future. For now though, I'll leave you to the music, so happy listening, and I'll see you here next time on Passion for Sound.